Find yourself in a body that is not your own? Do not let their family know you are afraid. I just want to start by saying I am sorry. If you find yourself in a situation like what I am about to describe, I can't offer much comfort, only a resolution. You can skip to the end if you feel so inclined, but I don't think you'll be able to stomach it. Not yet. I need you to see what I've seen to understand. For those of you who aren't in this situation, congrats. Just pray to whatever God you believe in that it stays that way. That is one of the horrors of this predicament. From what I can tell, it either happens or it doesn't, and the way out isn't easy. I was 12 years old when I started seeing my other parents. Years of therapy have tried and failed to convince me it never happened. Some figment of my imagination or symptom of repressed trauma. I wish it were that simple. I know you're probably wondering what I mean by other parents. Well, my real parents are as suburban as they come. Dad works a 9 to 5. Mom works hard making our house a home. As for me, I was a pretty shy kid. This resulted in a pretty virtual existence. Books, video games, and message boards were my social circle. I spent most nights retreating to my room for a wild night of Halo with the boys being my cousin and some random dude we befriended in a COD lobby. The night I met my other parents started on a night just like that. I wish I could say I should have seen it coming. Some prophetic dream or dark omen. Nope. Nothing remarkable about that day, nothing out of place, no warning. I came home from school just like any other day. I finished dinner and made my way up the creaky stairs to my bedroom. A faint buzzing sensation, a flicker of light. I was someplace else. The smell hit me first, that new house smell you notice when stepping into a friend's home for the first time. Moments later, my eyes adjusted. I was sitting at a large white table. A half-eaten bowl of food sat in front of me. Before I could register anything else, they caught my attention. A man sat to my left, a woman to my right. A sound escaped me before the shock settled in. The couple glanced in my direction. The comfy scene I stepped into suddenly became very tense. The woman wore a concerned look and uttered something at me. The language was very alien, how I would imagine English would sound if I had heard it for the first time. If I had to guess, it was a remark of concern regarding my sudden tenseness. I didn't know how to respond. I glanced around, hoping to gain some understanding of what was happening to me. That's when I noticed just how surreal the room was. Despite the circumstances, the sight sounded fairly ordinary. A boy sitting at a dinner table with who I assumed were his parents. I was doing the same about 10 minutes earlier in my own home, only the furniture was different. Everything was varying shades of glaring white. The walls and cabinets bent and swayed at odd angles. Trinkets and appliances littered the scene. I couldn't make out the function of any of it. At a glance, everything looked normal, familiar. But the closer you looked, the more alien everything became. Comforts of home stretched and bent with odd intentions. The parents looked like normal people for the most part. The only jarring detail was their clothing. I couldn't make out the style or garment. The man wore something akin to a suit while the woman wore a loose imitation of a dress. The colors were summery and bright, contrasting harshly against the stark white backdrop. The seams were scattered and non-uniform. Buckles and zipper-like decals adorned both outfits. The man lowered his utensils and uttered something with a raised eyebrow. It wasn't a warm or concerned remark like his counterpart had shot me a moment ago. It was cold, inquisitive. Only a few moments passed, but the tense presence of the strangers made it feel like eternity. I had to say something. All I could muster was a faint, sorry, where... Before I could get the words out, I froze. That wasn't my voice. I was speaking through someone else's mouth, in someone else's home, to someone else's family. This was obviously a dream. It couldn't be real. Tears started to well up in my surrogate eyes. I felt panic coming on, a faint buzzing sensation, a flicker of light. I was back in my room. The moment left as quickly as it came. The final image of my unwelcome stay in that stark white dining room burned into my mind. Mid-panic, I caught a glimpse of the parents' expressions. It wasn't confusion or concern. Any hint of that was gone. They were smiling at each other. It wasn't a joyful smile. Their lips curled, stretching too wide. A hunger glimmered in their eyes, an anticipation of something. Something I fear would have been very apparent had I stayed a moment longer. I took a shaky sigh of relief. I felt thankful to be back in my room, in my own body. For a moment, I hoped to forget all about it, bury it deep behind a wall of virtual comfort. After all, it couldn't happen. Before I could finish the thought, I noticed something. Something was off. Yes, I was back in my room, but I wasn't in the same position as when I left. And my room was different too. Someone did this, I did this, the white room, the parents. It wasn't just a dream, it happened. I was in some kid's home, sharing dinner with his creepy parents. And worse, the other kid was here, in my room, in my body. I appreciate everyone's feedback regarding this whole ordeal. I will admit it feels nice having validation after all this time. I've taken some time to really process what happened after that night. There's a lot to cover, so I'm just going to dive in. I stood facing the hallway, my heart pounding. This wasn't where I was before. Well, before whatever just happened. Before the dining room, I was walking to my desk. I braced myself and slowly turned around. It was like a small tornado struck my room and disappeared. I stumbled through overturned furniture and stray clothing while observing the damage. Homework lay strewn across my desk. My computer looked like a toddler got at it. Did he try to use my computer? I reached for the overturned mouse to see if there were any clues there. Click. Something fell from my hand as I reached towards the desk. I didn't even realize I'd been holding a pencil. I must have been writing something. Well, he must have been writing something. My eyes drifted over a trail of papers leading toward the exit. To my surprise, the papers were blank. Then I saw it. Just to the right of the doorframe stood my body snatcher's handiwork. I stumbled over some boxes to get a closer look. It didn't make any sense to me at the time. The drawing was composed of deep lines arranged in a circular pattern. I traced my fingers over the marks. Was he trying to leave me a message? There were too many unanswered questions running through my mind. What was he looking for? Who is he? What was that place? Another sweep of the room didn't yield any new information. My computer screen was a mirror image of the rest of the room. A mess of purposeless applications were chaotically arranged with garbage text sprinkled everywhere. Either he didn't know how to use a computer or he wasn't even trying. He couldn't have been on here for more than a few seconds by the looks of it. It didn't make any sense. While I was having supper with Mr. and Mrs. Uncanny Valley, their kid ransacked my room and drew cave drawings on my wall. It sounds comical, but the reality of it was terrifying. I stayed home from school for a few days. It's easy to fake being sick. But after a few nights of sleeping on the couch, my parents started questioning why I was avoiding my room. Worry turned to panic in their minds. I'm sure they thought the worst, although I'm not sure their imagined threat could really compete with what really happened. But what could I do? I can't tell them what really happened. I would rather them think I was depressed than know I was worried that walking into my room would send me to an alternate reality. I want them to be worried about my well-being and not my sanity. As the days passed, my vague deflections to their questions weren't enough. After all, parents always know when something is up. They may not know what it is, but they know when it is serious. After a few failed attempts to move the discussion further, they took me to see a therapist. It was the first time I had ever seen a therapist. I had nothing against therapy. I just knew it wouldn't fix my problem. He was a nice guy, so I tried my best to comply without sounding crazy. I told him I was afraid to sleep lately because of a vivid nightmare and left it at that. "And why do you think they were smiling?" he asked. "I'm not sure. At first I thought it was because they realized I wasn't their kid, like they caught me." I hesitated. But I don't know. It almost felt like they enjoyed it. The thought made me shiver. Enjoyed what, exactly? His voice was neutral but intrigued. Seeing me like that, scared, crying. The words felt heavy. But yeah, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, nightmares don't always make sense, right? I forced a chuckle. He nodded, offering some clinical explanation about social anxiety, something about discomfort, vulnerability, fear of strangers. It was logical, neat, easy. He gave me a few words of comfort, assigned me exercises to help me sleep, and sent me on my way. I knew the switch was real, but it had been so long since that horrible night. I needed to move on. If I could be sure it wouldn't happen again, I could live with it. I just needed to test something. That night, I returned to the hall outside my room. It was surprising that I managed to stay out of it this long. After a lot of pep talk and a few prayers, I stepped through the doorway with gritted teeth. Nothing happened, no buzzing, no white room. Relief washed over me. I didn't sleep much that night, and many nights after that for that matter, but it felt nice to be back in my own bed. Weeks passed. I started sleeping again. I felt at ease. The feeling didn't last long. I was stepping off the school bus one sunny afternoon. Nothing out of the ordinary. My parents' shiny Suburban sat in the driveway of our two-story. My neighbor's cat, Raphael, named after the Ninja Turtle, not the artist, curled up on a lawn chair beside the porch. It was a cozy scene. I can almost feel it in my mind even now. As I took a few steps into the cobblestone driveway, I felt that familiar buzzing in my head. A few moments later, a flash of light swept over my eyes. I was no longer standing in front of my home. I was looking out a window in a white marble room. No, not again. I clutched my chest and backed away from the window. I was in a stark white room like last time, only this one was much smaller. My heart was pounding. Panic was coming on fast. This isn't real. It can't be happening again. I must be going crazy. A loud creak came from somewhere outside the room. It was one of them. I just knew it. It was at that point I realized how quiet it had been. Since I arrived, there was no sound. I couldn't hear a single thing from inside or outside the house. It was as if the volume had been turned off. It almost felt intentional. A second creak ripped through the silence. Footsteps. I quickly gathered myself and returned to the window. Maybe if I kept my composure, just as it was before I arrived, they wouldn't notice me. Don't let them see you. Don't let them know you're afraid. They'll know it's not you. I held my breath and bit my lip. Please don't come in. I knew if they came and saw my face, that would be the end of it. They would know. The footsteps grew louder. Damn it. Please, God, please keep walking. I tasted blood. I softened the bite on my lip and focused on the window. I needed to catch a reflection of whoever was approaching. Before I could see anything, something outside the window caught my attention. It was unsettling. I was looking out at a neighborhood. It was a gloomy evening. Ominous clouds hung low above rows of identical marble houses with black rooftops. They all had the same aesthetic, cold and minimalistic. Familiar, but still very alien. Everything appeared meticulously maintained. Not a blade of grass on the lawns was uncut. The streets were clean and seamless. Not a crack could be seen on the road or sidewalk. It was strange how lifeless everything was. I couldn't see a single person from this window. No vehicles moving on the streets, no children or pets. No wonder the silence was so apparent. The sound of footsteps reached its climax and began to fade. I waited until that familiar silence returned and took a sigh of relief. I took a few moments to ground myself and collect my thoughts. I need to hide. I scanned the room. It was composed of 4 marble walls. A single square opening led into a dark hallway I didn't dare approach. There was no door, no way of locking anyone out. I looked under what I thought was the bed. The frame was flush with the floor. No way of getting under there. There was no closet. This place was just as surreal as the dining room. I couldn't make sense of anything, and time was running out. The window. I returned to the window and pattered around for a way to open it. I fiddled quietly with a mechanism at the base of the window. It gave with a gentle click and slid upward. I carefully pushed my head through the opening and scanned below. The lawn was about 10 feet down. The journey down was steep and no footholds were in sight. I wasn't going to get there safely unless I could use something to rappel down. Maybe if I just... A hand squeezed my shoulder from behind. I yelled in shock and ripped my shoulder out of the owner's grip. I lost my balance in the scuffle and rolled forwards out the window towards the perfectly trimmed grass waiting below. I fell flat on my back with a loud thud. My vision went blurry. The wind was knocked out of me. I rolled onto my knees and tried to look ahead. My vision was still hazy, but I needed to start running. I clumsily rose to my feet as the neighbor's home started to fill my vision. I must have hit my head. I could see flecks of light radiating from the windows that weren't there before. As I shook off the haziness that was brought on by the fall, I hesitated. Those weren't lights in those windows. They were eyes. Dozens of hungry eyes peered down at me from the homes. My fall must have alerted them. The familiar bright outfits of the strangers were faintly visible. I couldn't make out their faces, but I knew they were smiling. I lowered my eyes from the jeering faces above me and began to move. I could hear footsteps behind me now. Whoever cornered me in that house was sprinting after me. I darted down the sidewalk. The marble homes started to pass by as I picked up speed. The footsteps behind me were deafening. I tried to run faster, but my legs weren't cooperating. It felt like my shoes were filling with sand. The adrenaline was masking the pain of the fall, but the effects were still there. Within seconds, that same hand had me by the shoulder again. A second hand grabbed me firmly by the neck from behind. I clawed at my surrogate family's arms, but it was no use. I was slowly being dragged backwards. "Please, I am not your son. Please let me go, please," I pleaded through choked sobs. Silence. I tried to remain upright as my assailant continued down the path we came. I noticed the eyes that once followed me from the windows now peered at me from cracked doors and front lawns. Toddlers, children, adults. They were all wearing bright clothing and unnerving expressions. There was no concern on anyone's face. All I could make out were varied expressions of intrigue, curiosity, and delight. I prayed to switch back and end this nightmare. I felt my consciousness start to fade as the grip around my neck failed to give. The sight of cut grass and marble homes started to blur against the gloomy evening sky. My prayer was answered. The grip on my neck must have distracted me from the buzzing sensation in my head. The pressure around my neck dissipated and fresh air filled my lungs as a flash of light swept over my eyes. The gloomy nightmare faded away and that sunny evening after school came rushing back. Just like that, I was back in my reality. Thank you, God, I thought to myself. I wanted to cry. Only something wasn't right again. The first thing that hit me was a crisp, earthy smell. Clusters of trees started to fill my vision. It felt familiar. The wooded area behind my backyard. He must have come here, but why? This isn't good. We were switched for a lot longer this time. Who knows what he got into while I was... Blood. I looked down in horror. My hands, my clothes, soaked. It was still red and warm, clinging to my skin in thick clots. A dark, slumped mass lay before me, an unrecognizable heap of flesh. My fingers were buried in it, sinking into the mess. This wasn't just a wrecked room or vandalized wall. He did something terrible this time. I was alone, in the woods, covered in blood that wasn't mine, and whoever it belonged to. I don't think they were still breathing.